Hello, everyone. Today we are continuing with Weird Tales, March 1923. Yesterday we read The Ooze. Today we're reading An Extraordinary, Unearthly Things Will Thrill and Amaze You in This Strange Story, The Thing of a Thousand Shapes, by Otis Adelbert Klein. So, yeah, I really wonder. Like the last time, we kind of knew it's a classic monster story, Dead Man's Tale. That's another classic, like Poltergeist story. I'm really curious what this will end up being. The Thing of a Thousand Shapes kind of implies Lovecraftian, but Lovecraft gets his start in this magazine, and this is the first issue. So I really wonder, how this will go. Uncle Jim was dead. I could scarcely believe it. But the little yellow missive, which had just been handed to me by the Western Union messenger boy, left no room for doubt. It was short and convincing. Come to Peoria at once. James Baddock died of heart failure. Corbin and his attorneys. I should explain here that Uncle Jim, my mother's brother, was my only living near relative, having lost both father and mother in the Iroquois theater fire at the age of 12 years. I should have been forced to abandon my plans for high school and commercial education but for his noble generosity. In his hometown he was believed to be comfortably well off, but I had learned not long since that it had meant a considerable sacrifice for him to furnish the $1,500 a year to put me through high school and business college. And I was glad when the time came for me to find employment and thus became independent of his bounty. My position as a bookkeeper for a commission firm in South Water Street, while not particularly remunerative, at least provided a comfortable living, and I was happy in it until the message of his death came. I took the telegram to my employer, obtained a week leave of absence, and was soon on the way to the Union Depot. All the way to Peoria, I thought about Uncle Jim. He was not old, only 45, and when I had last seen him, he had seemed particularly hale and hearty. This sudden loss of my nearest and dearest friend was, therefore, almost unbelievable. I carried a laden weight in my heart, and it seemed that the lump in my throat would choke me. Uncle Jim had lived on a 320-acre farm near Peoria. Being a bachelor, he had employed a housekeeper. The farm work was looked after by a family named Sever, a man, wife, and 2 sons, who lived in a tenant house perhaps 1,000 feet to the rear of the owner's residence, in convenient proximity to the barns, silos, and other farm buildings. As I had said, my uncle's neighbors believed him to be comfortably well off, but I knew the place was mortgaged to the limit, so that the income from the fertile acres was practically absorbed by overhead expenses and interest. Had my uncle been a businessman, in the true sense of the term, no doubt he could have been wealthy, but he was a scientist and a dreamer, inclined to let the farm run itself while he devoted his time to study and research. His hobby was psychic phenomena. His thirst for more facts regarding the human mind was insatiable. In the pursuit of his favorite study, he had attended seances in this country and abroad with the leading spiritualist of the world. He was a member of the London Society for Physical Research, as well as the American Society, and corresponded regularly with noted scientists, psychologists, and spiritualists. As an authority on psychic phenomena, he had contributed articles to the leading scientific publications from time to time, and was the author of a dozen well-known books on the subject. I think we're going in the Lovecraft direction. Psychic spiritualists, suddenly died, grief-stricken relative. I can definitely see Lovecraft type stuff here. Thus, grief-filled though I was, my mind kept presenting to me memory after memory of Uncle Jim's scientific attainments and scholarly life, while the rumbling car wheels left the miles behind, and the thought that such a man had been lost to me and to the world was almost unbearable. I arrived in Peoria shortly before midnight, and was glad to find Joe Severs, son of my uncle's tenants, waiting for me with a flivver? Flivver? I do not know what that word is. Okay, I looked it up. It's a flivver is a cheap car in bad condition. So it's a rusty or junker. After a 5-mile ride in inky darkness over a rough road, was come to the farm. I was greeted at the door by one housekeeper, Miss Rhodes, and one of 2 men, nearby neighbors, who had kindly volunteered to set up with the corpse. The woman's eyes were red with weeping, and her tears flowed afresh as she led me to the room where my uncle's body lay in the gray casket. A dim kerosene lamp burned in one corner of the room, and after the silent watcher had greeted me with a hand clasp and a sad shake of the head, I walked up to view the remains of my dearest friend on earth. As I looked down on that noble, kindly face, the old lump, which had for a time subsided, came back to my throat. I expected tears, heart-rending sobs, but they did not come. I seemed dazed, bewildered. Suddenly and apparently against my own reason, I heard myself saying aloud, "He is not dead, only sleeping." When the watchers looked at me in amazement, I repeated, "Uncle Jim is not dead. He is only sleeping." Miss Rhodes looked compassionately at me, and by a meaning glance at the others, said as plainly as if she had spoken, "His mind is affected." She and Mr. Newberry, the neighbor whom I had first met, gently led me from the room. I was myself dumbfounded at the words I had uttered, nor could I find a reason for them. My uncle was undoubtedly dead. At least as far as the physical world was concerned, there was nothing about the appearance of the pale, rigid corpse to indicate life, and he had without doubt been pronounced dead by a physician. Why, then, had I made this unusual, uncalled for, in fact ridiculous statement? I did not know. I concluded that I must have been crazed with grief, beside myself for the moment. Always being contacted from beyond the grave. I had announced my intention to keep watch with Mr. Newberry and the other neighbor, Mr. Glitch, but was finally prevailed upon to go to my room on the grounds that my nerves were overwrought and I must have rest. It was decided, therefore, that the housekeeper, who had scarcely slept a wink the night before, and I should retire, while the 2 neighbors alternately kept 2 hours' watch, one sitting up while the other slept on a davenport near the fireplace. Miss Rhodes conducted me to my room. I quickly undressed, blew out the kerosene light, and got into bed. It was some time before I could compose myself for sleep, and I remember that just as I was dozing off, I seemed to hear my name pronounced as if someone was calling me from a great distance, "Billy!" And then in the same faraway voice, "Save me, Billy!" I had slept for perhaps 15 minutes, while I woke with a start. Either I was dreaming of something about the size and shape of a half-grown conger eel, I don't know, was creeping across my bed. For the moment I was frozen with horror, as I perceived the white, nameless thing in the dim light from my window. With a convulsive movement, I threw the bedclothes from me, leaped to the floor, struck a match, and quickly lit the lamp. Then, taking my heavy walking stick in hand, I advanced on the bed. Moving the bedclothing cautiously with the stick and prodding here and there, I was at length discovered that the thing was gone. The door was closed, there was no transom, and the window was screened. I therefore concluded that it must still be in the room. With this thought in mind, I carefully searched every inch of space, looking under and behind the furniture, with the lamp in one hand and stick in the other. I then removed all the bedding and opened the dressing drawers and found nothing. After completely satisfying myself with the animal I had seen, or perhaps seemed to see, could not possibly be in the room, I decided that I had been suffering from a nightmare, and again retired. Because of my nervousness from the experience, I did not again blow out the light, but instead turned it low. After a half hour of restless turning and tossing, I succeeded in going to sleep, this time for possibly 20 minutes, when I had once more aroused the same feeling of horror come over me, as I distinctly heard a rolling, scraping sound beneath my bed. I kept perfectly still and waited while the sound went on. Something was apparently creeping underneath my bed, and it seemed to be moving toward the foot, slowly and laboriously. Stealthily, I sat up, leaned forward, and peered over the footboard. The sounds grew more distinct, and a white, round mass, which looked like a porcupine, rolled into a ball with bristles projecting, emerging from under my foot. I uttered a choking cry of fright, and the thing disappeared before my eyes. So I thought we were getting into like more standard ghost story, but this is a weird description. So now I'm really wondering where we're going. Without waiting to search the room further, I leapt from the bed to the spot nearest the door, wrenching it open and started on a run for the living room, attired only in pajamas. As I neared the room, however, part of my lost courage came back to me, and I slowed down to a walk. I reasoned that a precipitate entrance into the room would arouse the household, and that possibly, after all, I was only the victim of a second nightmare. I resolved, therefore, to say nothing to the watchers about my experience, but to tell them only that I was unable to sleep and had come down for company. Newberry met me at the door. "Why, what's the matter?" he asked. "You look pale. Anything wrong?" "Nothing, but a slight attack of indigestion. Couldn't sleep, so I came down for company." "You shouldn't have brought a dressing gown. You should have brought a dressing gown or something. You may take cold." "Oh, I feel quite comfortable enough," I said. Newberry stirred the logs in the fireplace to a blaze, and we moved our chairs close to the flickering circle of warmth. The dim light was still burning in the corner of the room, and Glitch was snoring on the davenport. "Funny thing," said Newberry. "The instructions the uncle left." "Instructions? What instructions?" "Why, you didn't know?" "But of course you didn't. He left written instructions with Miss Rhodes that in case of his sudden death his body was not to be embalmed, packed in ice, or preserved in any way, and that it was not to be buried under any consideration until decomposition had set in. He also ordered that no autopsy should be held until it had been definitively decided that putrefaction had taken place." "Have these instructions been carried out?" "To the letter," he replied. "And how long will it take for putrefaction to set in?" "The doctors say it will probably be noticed in 24 hours. I reflected on the strange order of my uncle's. It seemed to me that he must have feared being buried alive, or something of the sort, and I recalled several instances, of which I had heard, where bodies upon their being assumed had found turned over in their coffins, while others had apparently torn their hair and clawed the lid in their efforts to escape from a living tomb. I was beginning to feel sleepy again, and had just started to doze when Newberry grasped my arm. "Look!" he exclaimed, pointing toward the body. I looked quickly and seemed to see something white for an instant near the nostrils. "Did you see it?" he asked breathlessly. "See what?" I replied, wishing to learn if he had seen the same thing I had. "I saw something white, like a thick vapor, a filmy veil, come out of his nose. When I spoke to you, it seemed to jerk back. Didn't you see it?" "Thought I saw a white flash there when you spoke, but it must have been imagination." The time had now arrived for Glitch to watch, so my companion wakened him, and they exchanged places. Newberry was soon asleep, and Glitch, being a stoical German, said little. I presently became drowsy, and I was asleep in my chair in a short time. A cry from Glitch brought me to my feet. "Wake up and help the cat!" "What cat?" demanded. "The big white cat," said Glitch, visibly excited. "Just now he came the door through and yumped the coffin in." The three of us rushed to the coffin, but there was no sign of a cat, and everything seemed undisturbed. "That's funny," said Glitch. "Maybe it's hiding somewhere in the room." We searched the room without result. "You've been seeing things," said Newberry. "What did the animal look like?" I asked. "White and big as a dog. It commanded the door in so, and galloped across the floor, so, and jumped in the casket just like a dot. Ach, it was a fierce-looking beast." Glitch was very much in earnest and gesticulated rapidly as he described the appearance and movements of the feline. Perhaps I should have felt inclined to laugh, had it not been for my own experience that night. I noticed, too, that Newberry's expression was anything but jocular. Jocular means, joyous. That's a kind of an old-timey word. It was now nearly 4 o'clock time for Newberry to watch, but Glitch protested that he could not sleep another wink, so the three of us drew chairs up close to the fire. On each side of the fireplace was a large window. The shades were completely drawn, and the windows were draped with heavy lace, maybe draped. I don't know. Happened to look up at the window to the left. I noticed something of a mouse gray color hanging near the top of one of the curtains. As I looked, I fancied I saw a slight movement of a wing being stretched a bit, then folded, and the thing took on the appearance of a large vampire bat hanging upside down. I called the attention of my companions to our singular visitor, and both saw it as plainly as I. How do you suppose it got in? Funny they didn't see him before, said Glitch. I picked up the fire tongs, and Newberry seized the poker. Creeping softly up to the curtain, I stood on tiptoe and reached up to seize the animal with the tongs. It was too quick for me, however, and fluttered out of my reach. There followed a chase around the room, which lasted several minutes. Seeing that it would be impossible for us to capture the creature by this method, we gave up the chase, whereupon it calmed down and suspended itself from the picture, holding upside down. That's kind of funny. They just spent several minutes chasing a bat around with a white bat. So it's clearly, I think his uncle turned himself into this thing. I think that's clear. But what manner and method he took is yet to be seen. On seeing this, Glitch, who had taken a heavy book from the table, hurled it at our unwelcome visitor. His aim was good, and the thing uttered a squeak as it was crushed under the wall. Glitch just chucked the book at it. Okay. At this moment, I thought I heard a moan from the direction of the casket, but could not be certain. Newberry and I rushed over to where the book had fallen, intent on dispatching the thing with poker and tongs, but only the book lay on the floor. The creature had completely disappeared. I picked up the book and noticed as I did so a grayish smear on the back cover. Taking this over to the light, we saw that it had a soapy appearance, and we looked. The substance apparently became absorbed either by the atmosphere or into the cloth cover of the book. There remained, however, a dry white, faintly defined splotch on the book cover. What do you make of it? I asked. Strange, said Newberry. I turned to Glitch and noticed for the first time that his eyes were wide with fear. He shook his head and cast furtive glance toward the casket. What do you think it is? I asked. A vampire. Maybe a real vampire. What do you mean by a real vampire? Glitch then described how, in the folklore of his native land, there were stories current of corpses which lived on in the grave. It was believed that the spirits of these corpses assumed the form of large vampire bats at night and went about sucking the blood of living persons, with which they would return to the grave from time to time and nurse the corpse. This proceeding was kept up indefinitely, unless the corpse was exhumed and a stake driven through the heart. Okay, that's kind of interesting vampire lore, where the corpse itself doesn't actually leave the coffin, it just sends this apparition out. I think that's kind of cool. He related, in particular, the story of a Hungarian named Arnold Paul, whose body was dug up after it had been buried for 40 days. It was found that his cheeks were flushed with blood and that his hair, beard, and nails had grown in the grave. When the stake was driven through his heart, he had uttered a frightful shriek and a torrent of blood gushed from his mouth. This vampire story seized on my imagination in a peculiar way. I thought again of my uncle's strange request regarding the disposition of his body, and the strange apparition I had seen. For the moment, I was a convert to the vampire theory. My better judgment, however, soon convinced me that there could not be such a thing as a vampire. And even if there were, a man whose character had been so noble as that of my deceased uncle would most certainly never resort to such hideous and revolting practices. We sat together in silence as the first faint streaks of dawn showed in the east. A few minutes later, the welcome aroma of coffee and frying bacon greeted our nostrils, and Miss Rhodes came in to announce that breakfast was ready. After breakfast, my newly made friends departed for their homes, both assuring me that they would be glad to come and watch me again that night. However, I read something in the uneasy manner of Glitch which led me to believe that I could not count on him, and I was therefore not greatly surprised when he telephoned me an hour later, stating that his wife was ill and that he would not be able to come. I mean, that's fair. I I strolled outdoors to enjoy a cigar, comforted by the rays of the morning sun after my night's experience. It was pleasant, I reflected, to be once more in the realm of the natural, to see the trees attired in the autumn foliage, to feel the rustle of fallen leaves underfoot, to fill my lungs with the spicy, invigorating October air. A gray squirrel scampered across my pathway, his cheeks pouches bulging with acorns. A flock of blackbirds, migrating southwards, stopped for a few moments in the trees above my head, chattering vociferously, and then resumed their journey with a sudden whir of wings and a few hoarse notes of farewells. It is but a step, I reflected, from the natural to the supernatural. This observation started a new line of thought. After all, what could anything be supernatural, above natural? Nature, according to my belief, was only another name for God, eternal mind, omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, ruler of the universe. If he weren't omnipotent, could anything take place contrary to his laws? Obviously not. The word supernatural was, after all, only an expression invented by man for his finite ignorance, to find those things which he did not understand. Telegraph, telephone, and the phonograph, the moving picture, all would have been regarded with superstition by an age less advanced than ours. Man had only to become familiar with the laws governing them in order to disregard the word supernatural as applied to their manifestation. What right then had I to term the phenomena which I had just witnessed supernatural? I might call them supernormal, but to think of them as supernatural would be to believe the impossible, namely that which is all-powerful had been overpowered. I kind of agree with that. I never had like a ghost type experience or anything like that, but I've heard so many stories of them, like so many people like that, or like claim that they're true and claim to personally have experienced something like that. That at some point you just gotta say, yeah, these things, they must happen for some reason. We don't know what they are, but to just say, oh, they can't possibly be existing at all, I think is pretty an arrogant thought. I resolved then and there that if further phenomena manifested themselves that night, I would, as far as it were possible, curb my superstition and fear, regarding them with the eye of a philosopher, and endeavor to learn their cause, which must necessarily be governed by natural law. A gray cloud of dust and the whirring of a motor announced the coming of an automobile. The next minute, an ancient fiver, with whose bumps of eccentricity I had gained some acquaintance, turned into the driveway and stopped opposite me. Joe Sevier, older son of my uncle's tenant, stepped out and came running toward me. Glitch's wife died this morning, and he swears Mr. Braddock is a vampire and sucked her blood. What rot, I replied. Nobody believes him, of course. I ain't so sure of that, said Joe. Some of the farmers are taking it mighty serious. One of the Langdon boys, first farm north of here, was took sick this morning. Doctor don't know what's the matter with him. Folks say it looks mighty queer. Miss Rhodes appeared on the front porch. A telephone call for you, sir, she said. I hastened to the phone. A woman was speaking. This is Mr. Newberry, she said. My husband is dreadfully ill, and asked me to tell you that he cannot come to sit with you tonight. I thanked the lady, offering my condolences, and tendered my sincere wishes for her husband's speedy recovery. This done, I wrote a note of sympathy to Mr. Glitch and dispatched Joe with it. Here, indeed, was a pretty situation. Glitch's wife dead, Newberry seriously ill, and the whole countryside frightened by this impossible vampire story. I knew it would be useless to ask of the other neighbors to keep waiting with me. Obviously, I was destined to face the terrors of the coming night alone. Was I equal to the task? Could my nerves, already unstrung by the previous night's experience, withstand the ordeal? I must confess, and not without a feeling of shame, that at this juncture I felt impelled to flee anywhere and leave my deceased uncle's affairs to shape themselves as they would. With this in mind, I repaired to my room. That's strange. And started to pack my grip. Okay, that's a weird way to phrase that. Something fell to the floor. It was my uncle's last letter, received only the day before the telegram arrived announcing his death. I hesitated, then picked it up and opened it. The last paragraph held my attention. "And Billy, my boy, don't worry any more about the money I had advanced you. It was, as you say, a considerable drain on my resources, but I gave it willingly, gladly, for the education of my sister's son. My only regret is that I could not have done more. Affectionately, Uncle Jim." A flash of guilt came over me. The reproach of my conscience was keen and painful. I had been about to commit a cowardly, dishonorable deed. "Thank God for the accidental intervention of that letter," I said fervently. My resolution was firmly made up now. I would see the whole thing through at all costs. The noble love, the generous self-sacrifice of my uncle should not go unrequited. I quickly unpacked my bag and walked downstairs. The rest of the day was uneventful, but the night, how I dreaded the coming of the night. As I stood on the porch and watched the last faint glow of sunset slowly fading, I wished that I, like Joshua, might cause the sun and moon to stand still. That's a Bible thing. Joshua, he was fighting some dudes, and God caused the sun to stay still, so it stayed in the eyes of his enemies. So that's that reference. Twilight came on all too quickly, accelerated by a bank of heavy clouds which appeared on the western horizon, and darkness succeeded twilight with unwonted rapidity. I entered the house and trod the hallway leading to the living room with much the same feeling, no doubt, that a convict experienced when entering the death cell. The housekeeper was just placing the lamp, freshly cleaned and filled, in the room. Joan Sever's younger brother, Sam, had placed logs in the fireplace with kindling and paper beneath them, ready for lighting. Miss Rhodes bade me a kindly "Good night, sir," and departed noiselessly. At last the dreaded moment had arrived. I was alone in the nameless powers of darkness. I shuddered involuntarily. A damp chill pervaded the air, and I ignited the kindling beneath the logs in the fireplace. Then, drawing the shades to shut out of the pitchy dark blackness of the night, I lighted my pipe and stood in the warm glow. Under the genial influence of pipe and warmth, my feeling of fear was temporarily dissipated. Taking a book from my library table, I settled down to read. It was called "The Reality of Materialization Phenomena," and had been written by my uncle. The publishers were Bulwer and Son, New York and London. It was apparently a record of the observation made by my uncle and materialization seances in this country and Europe. Contrary to my usual custom on starting a book, I read the author's introduction. He began by expressing the wish that those who might read the work should first lay aside all prejudice and preconceived ideas regarding the subject which were not based on positive knowledge. Then weigh the facts as he had found them before drawing a definitive conclusion. The following passage in particular held my attention. "While it is to be admitted with regret that there are many people calling themselves mediums who deceive their sitters nightly, and whose productions are consequently mere optical illusions producing my chicanery in Legardemain, the writer has nevertheless gathered at the sittings recorded in this book, where all possibilities of fraud were excluded by rigorous examinations and control, undeniable evidence that genuine materializations are and can be produced. The source and physical composition, if indeed it to be physical, of a phantasm materialized by a true medium, remains up to the present time inexplicable. That such manifestations are not hallucinations has been provided time and again by taking photographs. One would indeed be compelled to strain his credulity to the utmost, were he to believe that a mere hallucination could be photographed. As I had stated, and the exact nature and source of the phenomenon are apparently inscrutable. However, it is a notable fact that the strongest manifestations take place when the medium is in state of catalepsy, or suspended animation. Her hands are cold, her body becomes rigid, her eyes, if open, appear to be fixed on space. Oh, okay, so he's... this sounds basically like if you're familiar with a tulpa. It sounds like the uncle is projecting the white thing that we see as like a tulpa-like thing, which is basically like an imaginary friend that you dream into reality. That's kind of where that comes from. A roll of thunder, quickly followed by a rush of wind, rudely interrupted my reading. The housekeeper appeared in the doorway, lamp in hand. "Would you mind helping me close the windows, sir?" she asked. "There is a big rainstorm coming, and they must be closed quickly, or the furnishings and the wallpaper will be soaked." Together we ascended the stairs. I rushed from window to window, while she lighted the way with the dim lamp. This duty attended to, she again bid me good night, and I returned to the living room. As I entered, I glanced at the casket, then looked again while a feeling of horror crept over me. Either I was dreaming, or it had been completely draped with a white sheet during my absence. I rubbed my eyes, pinching myself, and advanced to confirm the evidence of my eyesight by the sense of touch. As I extended my hand, the center of the sheet rose in a sharp peak, as if lifted by some invisible presence, and the entire fabric traveled upward toward the ceiling. I drew back with a cry of dread, watching it with perhaps the same fascination that is experienced by a doomed bird or animal looking into the eyes of a serpent that is about to devour it. The point touched the ceiling. There was a crash of thunder, accompanied by a blinding flash of lightning, which illuminated the room through the sides of the ill-fated window shades, and I found myself staring at the bare ceiling. Walking dazedly to the fireplace, I poked the logs until they blazed, and then sat down to collect my thoughts. Torrents of rain were beating against the window panes. Thunder roared, and lightning flashed incessantly. I took up my pipe and was about to light it when a strange sight interrupted me. Something round and flat, about 6 inches in diameter, and of a grayish color, was moving along the floor from the casket toward the center of the room. I watched it, fascinated, while the blood seemed to congeal in my veins. It did not roll or slide along the floor, but seemed rather to flow forward. It reminded me, more than anything else, of an amoeba, one of the microscopic unicellular animalcule which I had examined in the study of zoology. An amoeba magnified perhaps several million diameters. I could plainly see it put forth projections resembling pseudopods from time to time, and again withdraw them quickly into the body mass. The lighted match burned my fingers, and I dropped it on the hearth. In the meantime, the creature had reached the end of the room and stopped. A metamorphosis was now taking place before my eyes. To my surprise, I beheld, in place of a magnified amoeba, a gigantic trilobite, larger, it is true, than any specimen which has ever been found, but nevertheless true to form in every detail. The trilobite, in turn, changed into a brilliant-hued starfish, which, with active, wriggling tentacles. The starfish became a crab, and the crab a porpoise swimming about in the air as if it had been water. The porpoise then became a huge green lizard that crawled about the floor. The fact that it's green is different. Usually they're all white so far. Soon the lizard grew large webbed wings. Its tail shortened, its jaw lengthened out with a pelican-like pouch beneath him, and its body seemed particularly covered with scales of a rusty black color. I afterward learned that this was a phantasmic representation of a pterodactyl, a prehistoric flying reptile. To me, in my terrified condition, it looked like a creature from hell. That's fair enough. That thing stood erect, stretched its wings, and beat the air as if to try them, then rose and circled twice about the room, flapping lazily like a heron, and once more alighted in the middle of the room. It folded its wings carefully, and I noticed many new changes taking place. The scales were becoming feathers, the legs lengthened out and were encased in thick, scaly skin. The claws thickened into 2-toed feet, like those of an ostrich. The head also looked ostrich-like, while the wings were shortened and feathered, but not plumed. The bird was much larger than any ostrich or emu I had ever seen, and stalked about majestically, its head nearly touching the ceiling. Soon it, too, stepped in the center of the room. The neck grew shorter and shorter, the feathers became fur, the wings lengthened into arms which reached below the knees, and I was face to face with a huge gorilla-like creature. It roared horribly, casting quick glances about the room, its deepest eyes glowing like coals of fire. I felt that my end had come, but could make no move to escape. I wanted to get up and leap through the window, but my limbs would not function. As I looked, the fur of the creature turned to a thin covering of hair and began to assume a man-like form. I closed my eyes and shuddered. When I opened them a moment later, I beheld what might have been the missing link, half man, half beast. The face, with its receding forehead and beating brows, was ape-like and yet man-like. Wrapped about its loins was a large tiger skin. In its right hand it brandished a huge knotted club. Raj became more man-like and less ape-like. The club changed to a spear, the spear to a sword, and I beheld a Roman soldier, fully accounted for a battle, with helmet, armor, target, and sandals. The Roman soldier became a knight, and the knight a musketeer, the musketeer became a colonial soldier. At that instant there was a crash of glass, and the branch of a tree projected through the window on the right of the fireplace. The shade flew up with a snap, and the soldier disappeared as a brilliant flash of lightning illuminated the room. I rushed to the window and saw that the overhanging limb of an elm had been broken off by the wind and hurled through the glass. The rain was coming in torrents. The housekeeper, who had heard the noise, appeared in the doorway. Seeing the rain blowing in at the window, she left and returned a moment later, with a hammered text and a folding sheet. I tacked the sheet to the window frame with difficulty on account of the strong wind, and again pulled down the shade. Miss Rose retired. I consulted my watch. It lacked just 1 minute of midnight. Only half of the night gone. Would it be strong enough to endure the other half? This story will be concluded in the next issue of Weird Tales. Tell your news dealer to reserve a copy for you. Oh, okay, so we got part 1 here. Oh, well, I don't know. I think I'll leave this to when I get to it naturally. So you all have to wait for part 2. Because I'm trying to, part of the reason why I'm doing this is to preserve, the kind of, the history of it, portray it as it was originally written. So you guys are going to have to wait until I get to the next part. Maybe never got read, who knows? We'll have to see. I think that, it's clear that the uncle is projecting some sort of mental projection. What it is, I can't quite say, because, at first I thought it was just a straight up, just his imagination. But it was always only taking the form of animals. But then it started taking different human shapes, a Roman soldier, then a colonial soldier, musketeer, that kind of thing. And it had, weapons and armor, and it could do other colors. Originally, it was just, a white shape, and then it got color, and then it became... So, I think it's really interesting. And I'm looking forward to when we get to the next one, but we'll have to wait and see. Tomorrow you will find blood-curdling realism and a smashing surprise in The Mystery of Black Jean by Julian Kilman. So, tune in tomorrow for that. Yeah, but that was the first part of The Thing of a Thousand Shapes by Otis Albert Klein. I'll leave it there. A bit short of an episode today. But, it is Christmas, so, go spend the time with your family. I'm just trying to be consistent about this. Otherwise, I would have I waited till tomorrow. But I'll leave it there. If you got to the end of this, like, comment, and subscribe. I'm planning on doing the whole thing. And this is the 1923 issue. This goes all the way until the 1950s. Though, after a while, it becomes more of a yearly publication than a monthly publication, so that's not quite as many as you would think. So, yeah, I'll leave it there. Like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.